I used to think love was easy. You find the right person, and everything just falls into place. You build a future together. You picture it. You plan it. You laugh about stupid things, make fun of your future kids' names, and think you're going to be together forever. I thought that was it. That was love, but then there comes a point where you realize you're not so sure anymore. You're not so sure about your relationship, about the person you've built your whole future around. And that's when you have to make a choice. Do you hold on and pretend everything's fine, or do you let go and admit that maybe, just maybe, the dream you've been chasing isn't real anymore? I've been there. I was in love with Laura. I thought I'd found the one. But as time went on, something changed. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't like one day I woke up and didn't love her. No. It was gradual, subtle, and it hurt to admit. It hurt because I couldn't figure out what happened. But it felt like we were both living in this perfect picture of love that no longer fit. And I didn't know how to change that. The thing about belief is that it's easy to live in a bubble. It's comfortable, safe, a place where everything makes sense. And that's exactly what I had done. I had built a bubble around myself and Laura, a bubble that was filled with all the dreams we had about the future. I thought that if I just kept believing, everything would work itself out. I held on to this idea that love would fix it all, that love could make the cracks disappear. It was my way of coping with the fear that I had no control over what was happening to us. All these years, I had convinced myself that we were one of those couples, one of those rare, perfect couples who were meant to be together. I was so sure of it. When we first met, everything felt like fate, like the universe had brought us together for a reason. I remember that feeling, the excitement, the connection. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. Every plan we made, every dream we shared, felt so real. It was all there, in front of me, in that bubble of certainty. I had a vision of what my life would be, our life would be. We'd be that couple that bought a house, had a dog, traveled together, grew old together. I could see us getting married, having kids, making memories that we'd tell our grandkids one day. It was simple, really. I just needed to believe in it. If I kept that belief alive, I thought everything would fall into place. We would be happy, and I would be happy because I knew we were right for each other. But somewhere along the way, that bubble started to show small cracks. The truth was, I didn't know how much of this dream was actually mine, or how much of it I had just assumed was going to happen because that's what people do. They follow this script, this expectation. You meet someone, fall in love, and everything else follows. Right. That's how it's supposed to go. And I thought that was the life I wanted, the life we were supposed to have. But the longer we were together, the more I started to question it. I realized that all these dreams, these perfect visions of the future that I had built up, were based on an assumption. I had assumed that things would just fall into place because that's what happens in the fairy tale version of life. But real life isn't a fairy tale. And no one prepares you for the fact that sometimes, love just isn't enough. Sometimes, even when you love someone deeply, you realize that you're not the person they need, and they're not the person you need. That's the hardest truth to swallow. My biggest fear wasn't that I didn't love Laura. That wasn't it at all. My fear was that everything I had believed in, everything I had built for years, was a lie. My fear was that I wasn't enough. I wasn't enough to fix things, and maybe, just maybe, Laura wasn't enough to fix me either. The thought of losing the future I had imagined, of losing her, was more than I could bear. And that fear, it clung to me, haunted me, pushed me to do things that didn't feel right, just to hold on to what I thought we had. I kept telling myself, it's just a rough patch. It'll get better. We'll get through it. We always do. But as the distance between us grew, so did my doubts. The cracks I had tried to ignore became more apparent, and I couldn't deny them anymore. I had no choice but to face the truth. Maybe we weren't the couple I thought we were. Maybe we weren't meant to be that perfect story. And that terrified me. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me feared that without Laura, I wouldn't be me anymore. I had spent so long defining my identity in terms of our relationship that I couldn't remember who I was without her. What did I want outside of us? What was I supposed to do without that future we had planned? I had so many dreams tied to that relationship, dreams that felt safe, predictable, and comfortable. But the fear of being alone, the fear of failing, kept me holding on to something that was falling apart at the seams. And that's when the bubble really started to burst. I could feel it. The weight of all these questions, these doubts. I couldn't live in the bubble anymore, pretending like everything was fine, pretending like everything would magically fix itself if I just kept believing. The fear of being wrong, of choosing the wrong path, of making the wrong decision, was paralyzing. But there was also something else I started to feel. Something I wasn't ready to face. Maybe this relationship wasn't meant to be fixed. Maybe the only thing I could fix was myself. I had spent so much time waiting for something outside of me to change, waiting for Laura to change, or for our relationship to magically go back to the way it was. But the truth was, the only thing I could control was me. And that thought was terrifying. Because the hardest thing about growing up, about facing the truth, is that you realize you can't rely on someone else to make you happy. You can't live in the bubble of your dreams forever. All the dreams I had built around us, the house, the kids, the dog, those were still there. But I started to realize they weren't the dreams that would define me anymore. It wasn't the life I had imagined that was going to bring me happiness. It was about learning how to let go of the dream of us and find the dream of me again. And that's when I realized something important. Sometimes, the fear of what you might lose can cloud the truth of what you already have, yourself. I don't know what the future holds anymore. I don't know if that perfect version of life was ever meant to be mine. But I do know that I need to stop living for a future that isn't happening, and start living for the life that is. That doesn't mean giving up on love. It just means understanding that sometimes, love isn't enough to hold it all together. And sometimes, the hardest thing you can do is let go of what you thought was your dream in order to build a new one. I think the first crack appeared without me even realizing it. It wasn't anything obvious. It wasn't like we had a huge fight or a massive falling out. It was just little things. The things that used to be so natural between us. Those spontaneous laughs, the inside jokes, the comfort of just being in each other's presence, started to fade. And I couldn't quite figure out why. It was subtle at first. At first, I convinced myself it was just stress, or maybe it was the long hours at work, or maybe we were just in a rut. But over time, the quiet moments started to feel more strained. Laura and I used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. We'd stay up late, make dinner together, plan trips, even talk about the small, insignificant things that didn't really matter, but felt important when we said them out loud. Those moments began to dwindle. Then, there was the phone. I started noticing it more and more, her phone. She was glued to it, almost obsessively. She'd sit across from me at dinner, scrolling through social media, checking messages, texting someone, usually not me. And when I'd ask her about it, she'd give me that same vague response, "Oh, it's just work stuff," or "I'm just catching up on some messages." I didn't know what bothered me more, the fact that she was distracted, or that she seemed completely unaware of how much it bothered me. It was like we weren't even in the same room anymore. I'd be talking, and her eyes would glaze over as she responded with a distracted "yeah, that sounds good," or "aha, I agree." I remember one night, sitting across from her, and asking about her day, and she just nodded. She didn't even look at me. She was so absorbed in her phone that she didn't notice the silence growing between us. And that silence wasn't the comfortable silence of two people who were just together. It was the kind of silence that made you wonder if you were even talking to the person you thought you knew. That's when the suspicion crept in. It was the feeling that something wasn't right, but you didn't have proof. It's a terrible thing to live with, this feeling that something is slipping through your fingers but you can't figure out where, or how, or why. It's like a constant knot in your stomach, like you're standing on the edge of something, but you can't quite see the drop. You just know it's coming. I'd catch her looking at me sometimes, but it wasn't the same look. It wasn't that softness I'd seen 1,000 times before, the warmth in her eyes that always made me feel like I was home. No, this was different. This look was distant. Like she was looking at me, but not really seeing me. Like she was somewhere else, somewhere far away, and I was just the guy sitting across from her at dinner. And each time I saw that look, it was like a weight dropped in my chest. A heavy, sinking feeling that told me something was wrong. And then there were the small things she started doing, or rather, the things she stopped doing. She used to text me good morning, just a simple hey, love you, have a great day. That stopped happening. She used to call me when she got off work, just to check in and hear my voice. That stopped too. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, because it did. Every time she'd come home late and I'd ask her how her day was, she'd give me a few surface-level details, but then quickly retreat to the couch or her phone. We'd sit there, together, but it felt like we were on different continents, not even the same page. Then came the moment that really started to break through my wall of denial, the night I caught her lying. It wasn't a big lie, but it was a lie, and it was enough to send a shiver down my spine. We were watching TV, just a random night, when she mentioned meeting up with some friends after work. I asked who she was going with, and she hesitated before saying, "Oh, just a couple of people from the office." It didn't feel right. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way she said it. Maybe it was the sudden shift in her tone. But I knew something wasn't adding up. Later that night, I found a text on her phone, accidentally of course, while we were charging it next to each other on the nightstand. It was from a guy named Chris, someone I hadn't heard her mention before. The message said, "Great time tonight. Can't wait to see you again." My heart stopped. I don't know what I expected, but it sure wasn't that. I felt a cold wave wash over me, like I had just stepped into freezing water. I didn't say anything right away. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at the screen, feeling the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble, piece by piece. I felt like a fool. A part of me wanted to confront her right then, demand answers, but another part of me was too scared to face what I already knew deep down. Maybe I didn't want to face the truth that she was slipping away from me. Maybe I was too afraid of losing her to let myself believe what was right in front of me. I remember lying awake that night, unable to sleep. Unable to get the image of that text out of my head. Was I paranoid? Was I overreacting? I didn't think so. I wasn't an idiot. The pieces were starting to fit together, and the picture wasn't pretty. I thought about all the little things, those moments when she would pull away from me, those half-hearted smiles, the distractions, the lies. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The worst part was knowing that, deep down, I had seen the cracks all along. But I kept telling myself that everything would get better, that things would smooth over. But they didn't. And now, here I was, staring at a text message that shattered everything I had believed in. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living this lie. I had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. Maybe that was the scariest part of all, realizing that the truth was in front of me, but I had been too scared to see it. Honestly, I don't even know when it started, the doubt, the unease, the feeling that something was off. It wasn't a single moment that made me realize things weren't what I thought they were. It was a slow burn, something that crept in over time. And that's the worst part, isn't it? When you're in something, and you can't even pinpoint when it stopped being right. When you can't even remember the last time you felt like things were okay. I think the first time I truly felt the shift was during a dinner we had a few months before the breakup. We just finished eating, and we were sitting at the table, and I looked at Laura, and I saw her, but I didn't feel her. I didn't feel that connection anymore. It was like we were strangers sharing a meal. She was talking about her day at work, and I was listening, but I wasn't really listening. I was hearing her, but it felt hollow. The things she said didn't matter like they used to. I was angry. Angry at myself, mostly. How had I let it get to this point? How had I ignored all the signs, all the small moments where things just didn't feel right? Why hadn't I done something sooner? But I couldn't bring myself to confront it directly, and that was part of the problem. I was scared. I was scared to face the truth, because facing the truth meant losing everything I thought I knew. It meant admitting that the future I had planned for us wasn't real, that the life I had envisioned wasn't going to happen. The pain of uncertainty is unbearable. It's worse than knowing something's wrong but not knowing exactly what it is. It's like walking through a fog, not being able to see clearly, but knowing that there's something dangerous ahead, something you're not prepared for, something that could shatter everything if you get too close. And then it hit me. I realized that the person I had become wasn't the person I wanted to be. I had spent so long defining myself by my relationship with Laura that I didn't even know who I was without her. She had been a part of me, sure, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself in trying to hold on to something that wasn't even there anymore. I was trying to hold the relationship together, but the truth was, I wasn't holding anything. I was suffocating it. And I was suffocating myself. It was terrifying. The idea that everything I thought I knew about love, about us, about what it meant to be happy, was all wrong. I had spent years building this version of myself, of us, and suddenly it felt like everything was crumbling beneath my feet. It wasn't that I didn't care about Laura. I did. I still did. But I started to wonder, was I still in love with her? Or had I just been in love with the idea of us? I started doubting everything. The love I thought I had for her, the future we had planned, the life I had imagined for us. I was starting to realize that sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, you can love someone deeply and still know that you're not meant to be together. It was like I was holding on to a version of the future that wasn't even real anymore. And that's when I started to ask the hardest question of all. What if we weren't right for each other? I had been too scared to ask myself that question before. Too scared to admit that maybe, just maybe, we weren't the people we thought we were. Or that we had changed, and not for the better. But asking that question, no matter how painful it was the beginning of something. It was the beginning of me letting go. Because the truth was, I didn't have the answers. And Laura didn't either. We were both in this fog, trying to find our way out, and neither of us knew how to clear the air. And I think that's the hardest thing about being uncertain. It's the realization that there's no clear answer, no map that tells you how to fix things. Sometimes, you just have to make a choice. And that choice can feel like the hardest thing you'll ever do. I hated the uncertainty, but I also knew it wasn't something I could run from anymore. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I faced it. And that meant facing the truth. No matter how much it hurt. I still remember the day I ended it. It wasn't a clean, clear-cut moment. It wasn't like I woke up and had this epiphany that I had to break up with her. No. It was messy. It felt like I was walking through a fog, not sure where I was going, just knowing I couldn't keep going down the same road. I was sitting across from her in our kitchen, and I knew something had to change. I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to make it sound like it wasn't her fault, like it wasn't me either. But I had to say it. Laura, we need to talk. I saw her eyes widen, and I knew she could feel it too. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the fear in her face. She knew what was coming. I don't think we're right for each other anymore, I said. I've been thinking about this for a while. We've changed. We're not who we were. It felt like I was ripping my own heart out as I said it. But I couldn't pretend anymore. I kept talking. I care about you, Laura. But I'm not sure we're in love anymore. And I don't think either of us is happy. She was silent. I saw tears in her eyes, but she didn't speak. The silence between us was deafening. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. I hated seeing her like that. I hated feeling like I was breaking her. But I knew it was the right thing. It had to be. A few weeks after we broke up, I was sitting at home, still trying to figure out how to move on, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something made me answer. Hello? I said, unsure of who it was. Hey, Jake. It's Emily. Emily. We met a few months ago at a friend's party, exchanged numbers, and kept in touch a little. I hadn't heard from her in a while. She was friendly, easy to talk to. But this was unexpected. "Hey, Emily. What's up?" I asked, a little confused. "Listen, I know this is a little strange, but I've been thinking about you. I think you need to hear something." That stopped me. "What do you mean, Jake? I know what happened with you and Laura. I know you think it was a mistake, but you did the right thing. You needed to let go." I was stunned. How did she know? How did she know what I was feeling? At first, I was just frozen, holding the phone to my ear, not knowing what to say. How did Emily know about my breakup with Laura? We hadn't talked about it. I hadn't even mentioned it to her. Yet here she was, speaking like she understood exactly what I'd been going through. "You don't know what you're talking about," I finally said, not sure what else to say. I was caught off guard, annoyed even, but also curious. There was something in her voice, something that made me want to hear more. "How do you know what I've been through?" Emily was calm, almost too calm. It was like she wasn't rattled at all by the questions I was throwing at her. Like she knew exactly where I was coming from, even if I didn't. "Because I've been there," she said simply. "I've been in a relationship where we held on, even though either of us was happy. And it took me so long to realize that sometimes, love isn't about holding on. It's about knowing when to let go." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was like she was speaking directly to the fears I'd been trying to ignore. The fears that had been gnawing at me since the breakup. What if I made the wrong choice? What if I was just scared to be alone? What if I couldn't love anyone else? "You're saying I did the right thing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She paused for a second, and I could feel her smile through the phone, even though she wasn't physically with me. "Yes, Jake. You did. You just don't see it yet. You needed to let go. And she needed to, too." Her words felt like a release, like someone had taken a weight off my shoulders. But I still wasn't sure. Could I really believe her? Could I believe that breaking up with Laura, someone I'd imagined my whole life with, was the right thing? But what if I was wrong? I asked. What if I hurt her? What if I made a mistake that I can't fix? Emily's voice softened. "Jake, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them go. Not because you don't care, but because you do. Because both of you need space to grow. You can't be afraid of the pain. It's part of life." Her words echoed in my head. I was still trying to process them, still trying to understand why they were hitting me so hard. But something in me was starting to click. Emily wasn't just talking about love. She was talking about life, about growing, about finding out who you are without relying on someone else to define you. I didn't know what to say. So I just let the silence hang between us for a moment. "Thanks, Emily," I said finally. It felt like the only thing I could say. I spent the rest of that night thinking about what Emily had said. Letting go was a concept I'd heard before, but hearing it from someone who had gone through it, who had lived it, made it feel like a revelation. Up until that point, I had been stuck. Stuck in this idea of love that I'd built for myself, this perfect image of what a relationship was supposed to look like. I had convinced myself that if I could just hold on long enough, everything would fall back into place. But deep down, I knew it wasn't working. Emily's words started to sink in. Love wasn't about holding on for dear life, trying to keep things from falling apart. It was about giving each other space to grow. Even if that meant separating. Maybe love wasn't always about being together forever. Maybe sometimes, love was about knowing when to step back and let each person evolve. I realized that I wasn't losing Laura because I'd let her go. I was freeing both of us. She needed the space to grow. I needed the space to grow. It wasn't about me or her failing. It was about us needing to find our own paths again. I started thinking about what it meant to be free, both as a person and as part of a relationship. If I kept holding on to the past, to what was no longer working, I would never be able to move forward. I would never be able to love again. Not fully. And so, the fear that had gripped me for so long started to fade. The fear of being alone, the fear of making a mistake, it all started to feel less important. What mattered now was living. What mattered was being honest with myself and with Laura. What mattered was giving myself, and her, the freedom to find happiness, whether that meant apart or together. A few months went by. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when I thought about Laura, when I wondered if maybe I made the wrong choice. But those moments became less frequent, and the guilt started to fade. I even reached out to Laura a few times just to check in. We talked, but it was different. There was no more pretending, no more trying to fix something that wasn't broken. We were both moving forward, and we both understood that our paths had diverged. And Emily? Well, I never expected it, but I found myself talking to her more. It wasn't romantic, not at first. But she had this way of making me see things clearly, of making me understand that sometimes you don't have to hold on to everything just to make it work. Sometimes, letting go is the most loving thing you can do. I'm not saying everything's perfect. I'm not saying I have all the answers. But I can say this: I learned that true love isn't about holding on. It's about giving each other the space to grow, to figure out who you are, to be who you were always meant to be. And sometimes you need to let go, not because you don't love them, but because you love them enough to let them go. I've learned to trust myself, to trust my decisions. I've learned that love doesn't always go according to plan. And that's okay. Because the real goal is growth. It's understanding that love, at its core, is freedom. Freedom to be who you are, and freedom to let the other person be who they need to be. I don't know where life is taking me next, but I'm not afraid anymore. I've let go. And now, I'm ready for whatever comes next.